Welcome to the third interviews of our series of interviews with people who are running Cleantech customers around the world. I introduce John O'Brien, who's the Managing Director of Cleantech Australia. John, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, we're just grabbing him for an interview before a meeting of the Melbourne Cleantech cluster at the Melbourne airport, and I'm about to fly off back to Singapore.
Indeed.
So it's all pretty quick. Sorry for being casually dressed, and you're in a suit, of course. Can you tell us a little bit about Cleantech Australia and the work that you've been doing?
Yep, certainly. So we've been running Australian Cleantech for 7 years now. Set it up in 2007. We run a national network events through the Australian Cleantech Network. We're also funded by the Australian government to run a number of initiatives, including a national competition for Cleantech and a Cleantech cluster. And a lot of the work we do is about helping growing cleantech companies access markets. So we do quite a lot of work educating the markets and industry on what the benefits are, and then also helping increase the capabilities of those cleantech companies to enter those markets and make that connection.
Yeah, the capability of cleantech companies is a big issue.
Yeah,
because they may have a great idea and they may be very have the right intentions, but getting them to communicate with potential customers and stakeholders is difficult.
Yeah, and it's very much about sort of having a market pull on technology push. So, yep, a great idea, but you have to find the need and actually understand it and be able to communicate that to that market. So we do a lot of work on that.
First difficult question of the interview.
Yep.
Of the companies that you work with, what sort of success rate do you have in getting them to accept that they do need help? Over those 7 years.
Yeah, interesting. The ones that will succeed,
the ones that are still left.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, starting.
So I mean, there's a variety. There's a huge variety, and if you look at say last year's Australian Cleantech competition, there's even the top 30 companies. We do a whole lot of mentoring with them. Even once they got to that stage, there's a huge variety of. There's the professional investor. There's the guy who's just come out of the shed with a great idea.
Which are normally the guys I like.
And everything in between. And the expectation of, I'll start with a very preconceived idea that, that guy's just come out of the shed, he won't listen to a word. And, all my preconceptions are always wrong. It's kind of, some people who you think are going to resist will go, gee, actually, that's brilliant. Okay, now I understand what I'm trying to do. And the people you have great sort of, think, oh, they'll just get it, they'll understand that. Just go, no, I know too much, I don't need to listen to you.
Yeah.
And so there's a real challenge in just helping, and we do it in a number of different ways, in a number of different programs, and in just increasing that capability, and also educating the market on how to hear things a bit better as well. So we work at both things.
That's a very nice way to put it, how to hear things better.
Yeah.
Can I use that? That's a good line. Now, just over those 7 years, how many companies do you think you've interacted with?
So we do an annual review of the Australian market, and we've just finished the analysis. Haven't finished the report yet, but there's just about 1,500 companies in that, Australian companies.
Okay.
Everything from the solar installer to the inventor to the waste management type companies. We probably haven't had direct contact with all of those, but we've had 300 or 400 companies through the competition. With our networking events we're having here tonight, we've had nearly 100 companies pitching at those over the years. There's a lot of companies of different quality and different sectors, and we kind of, if we don't know them, we know someone who does. So.
Yeah, that's interesting, because Australia's a bit like that. It's not a huge market.
No, indeed.
No, and it's sort of. Do you find much comes out of universities or industry or private enterprise, or is it a bit of a mix?
There's little comes out of university. There's fantastic research in Australia, but very little good commercialisation. And
that's a job.
Yeah,
that's a job for somebody out there.
That's a hell of a job, and it's beyond me.
You can just tell them what to do, and somebody else can do it, John.
I think that's right. So I mean, there's a lot of Australia's, I don't know, there's a strange psychology of Australia in some ways, but there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, a lot of inventiveness, but just the commercialisation isn't great. So there's a lot of good ideas that are there but are not getting to market, and there's some strange psychology of Australia.
You always wonder when Australia's so obsessed with sport and punches so much higher than its weight in sport. I mean, New Zealand arguably has a better record for punching over its weight, but that tells you a little bit about the New Zealanders. They're quite capable, but you look at Australia and we have these great rugby teams, these great soccer teams, we're really good at everything, or we're normally pretty good at everything, and there's so few of us. And if we applied that rigour to the development of business, we'd be world beaters. We'd be like the Koreans,
Well,
who are my favourite people. They're fantastic at doing stuff.
Yeah.
But just can't get it together.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things, the other thing that is difficult in Australia is the finance side of things. So there's little investment interest in the sector on the innovation side of things in Australia. So one of the things we've been doing is working a lot through North Asia and looking for investors there to match with Australian companies to provide them with a much needed investment, but then also to take them back to those markets.
You do a Cleantech index in China, don't you?
Yes,
through the Australian Cleantech as well.
It is. So we publish stock market indices here in China, which just tracks the stock performance of 150 Chinese companies and 70 Australian companies, and the China one particularly had a very bad couple of years, but the last 12 months has been absolutely flying. There's probably over enthusiasm in the stock market in China on Cleantech 3 years ago. Then it all collapsed and went too low, but it's been coming back strongly for a year.
It's funny. We have 2 customers out of China with TechDevNet.com. And both of those companies are not known for being in Cleantech. They're actually known for other things, but wow, the technology from one of them is really, 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 really good, and it's oil and gas quality. It's not. There's a perception of China, it must be cheap and mustn't be very good, but in this particular instance, they are manic about making sure that we're aware that there's tolerances and these are the design standards they're going to, because they know now there's a big change that making it cheap and throwing away is not going to work.
No.
Selling wrappers or small springs is not the way to make money. You need to make a product that actually is going to operate over its life cycle and satisfy customer demand.
Yeah, and one of the companies we work with up there is actually we help list in Australia as a plastics recycling, polypropylene recycling company.
Okay.
And they're very much, and they're benefiting a lot from the Chinese government push on closing the loop and recycling a whole lot of polypropylene. So.
Yeah, I think I spoke to someone this morning who wanted to talk more about waste management in China, specifically implementing technologies that can be used at community level.
Yep.
That was something of great interest to them. They don't want the massive incinerator because there's many companies offering it. But if you have a solution which is...
You can roll out to the villages.
Or you can roll out to suburban areas. So you can have a city with 20 separate waste destruction facilities with a very low transport footprint. Everybody's very happy. That was interesting. And that sort of thinking has taken a while to communicate to people, but in China they were very open to it. So,
I think that's right.
So what's happening? How many companies have you actually got in the cluster or involved in the cluster right now?
There's one of the clusters where we're particularly taking them to industry. We've got 260 companies. Our network events, so these are it's basically free to come along. So
wow. Who pays for the catering? You have a sponsor.
So we get sponsors,
Okay, that's great.
The City of Hume is sponsoring tonight, the local municipality, and we've got KPMG, or we've got one of the big law firms, or the patent attorneys, or Macquarie Bank has done them in the past. So it's we do about 20 of these a year around Australia, in 5 cities, and we've got 80 coming along tonight. So so it's pretty consistently 80. So every couple of months we'll see 300 or 400 people. So.
In the first 2 series, we interviewed Kavita Gandhi from the Sustainable Energy Association previously, and then before that, Christian Fritz, who runs the EcoSmart, effectively incubator in Bali. And we're going to do a few more interviews with people doing the same sort of activity around the region, because we think that whilst having companies that are in the space is good, and whilst having bilateral organisations like ADB or World Bank or IFC who are focusing on trying to roll it out, and having local entrepreneurs who are very keen to take up the technologies, and banks and financiers who want to take part, actually getting those people to see what other countries are doing. So, for instance, Singapore's system is very much grant-driven, whereas in Australia with the new government, that's not going to be the case.
No, indeed.
And so, I mean, you probably benefit pretty well from the Labor government, but I suspect that the Liberal government's not going to give you a lot of love, which is a pity, because actually
it's interesting, they're still running the programs that we're doing for the government, are still running, but they're being rebadged.
Okay.
So we need to take out the environmental emphasis, and it's more about efficiency and competitiveness.
Okay.
But it's the same program delivering the same outcomes.
Mentality is that they still think that environmental activities is about complying.
Yeah.
It's about you've got to meet this standard or you've got to not do this.
Yeah.
When in fact it's not about complying, it's about making money from providing environmental services.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And they just don't get it.
Well, and they kind of do. They can, slowly. So it's about trade and investment, and it's competitiveness,
Well,
and
look, China.
efficiency.
Talk about China. Talk about or India. You talk about these countries that have massive opportunities for the implementation of new methodologies for environmental services, and they're crying out for it. And people like the ADB are very keen to fund it, but we just don't. It's just not. It's not considered sexy, for a better word.
Yeah. Presses the.
That's a great pity.
It's left wing for some reason.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
Well,
and in Cleantech particularly, and is taking emerging companies and helping them thrive, and is as capitalist as you get.
But that's what everybody else is doing. It's what
it's
Korea's doing.
Yep.
It's what Japan did.
Yeah.
Singapore's doing it. Everybody's doing it. The Americans are doing it. Obama threw all this money at Cleantech. All this money, enormous amount.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't think they understand the game. I mean, one of the pivotal points for Australian sport was when they introduced I use the sport analogy because it gets across to Australians, the Institute of Sport, and that was modelled on what the Russians and the East Germans were doing.
That's right. Yeah.
And they looked at that and they said, oh, that's had a great success. Well, effectively what you're doing is exactly the same.
Yep.
So, I wish you well. I really hope they do have a good look in the mirror one morning and say, I wish you'd back these guys.
No, they'll back it. So.
Oh, good, I hope so. So what else is happening? What else is big and on the radar with you guys at the moment?
So we're doing a fair bit of work in battery technology and looking at bringing some battery technologies into Australia, because that's obviously potentially a huge market of how we do that. And we're also looking at some joint investment funds with some Asian partners, and how do we both with government and with private parties in Australia, and sort of set up venture funds to
That'll be technology and business building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not some of it will be specifically Cleantech. Most of it will be probably a bit wider. But it's just about how do you, again, it's it's connecting the money with the trade opportunity, and making all that flow. So.
Well, I noticed that Australia's AusAid has now been put inside the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, which is basically the trade organisation has taken over aid, and I think some people think, oh, we're not giving money away to help people as aid, but actually there's a revamp about applying aid so that it develops revenues for Australian companies. But also what the people are forgetting is that it gets Australian companies and Australian people into other markets so they can understand them, which is tremendously important.
Yeah.
I've got to fly for 7 hours just to get back to Singapore in a couple of hours.
Yeah.
So we're a long way away.
Oh yeah,
a long way away. One final question. My mum pulled me up. I've been in town for 10 days, and my mum pulled me up and she said, did you hear about this company that is making battery-powered farm vehicles? There's two inventors. I haven't checked it out yet. Do you know anything about that?
I don't.
Well, it just sounds very interesting. So instead of providing electric vehicles for like flat roads, these guys are providing high torque vehicles running batteries. And they've invented this themselves. I suspect they're guys out of a back garage. But if I find out more, we'd love. Yeah. Well, look, there's a lot of people say, oh, electric vehicles for in the city and jeepneys is great, but actually electric vehicles for communities that are remote and need things is a big driver. And the Australians will just think it's for agriculture, but actually it's something that's tremendously applicable to remote communities in Asia. So, yeah.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, John.
I look forward to hearing about that.
Well, when are you coming up to Asia again?
I'll be up in Singapore in April.
Good.
Speaking at the Cleantech World Conference.
When is that?
It's 22nd or something like that. It's
Okay.
just after Easter, I think. So, and I've got a couple of trips to Korea and China a bit later in the year, and we're also doing involved in a big project in the Philippines doing jeepney replacements. So
That's CNG or electrical?
LPG initially, probably.
Yeah.
But we're pushing some other technologies as
Yeah,
well.
well, I think EVs are a really simple one for that, especially in the Philippines.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, so
But hopefully that works.
Yeah, so Australia's a lovely place to live, but it's not quite as exciting as the rest of Asia. So
Well, there's just
I love getting up there.
The beauty of Asia is there's so many problems. There's so many things
Well,
to
that's
fix.
right. Yeah. When I was in Beijing in November, and it was the worst smog ever or something. And it was just like oh, this is perfect for Cleantech. So.
Yeah. If you don't die.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, John, thank you so much for taking your time.
My pleasure.
And we'll look forward to seeing you in Singapore, and maybe you never know, there might be some sort of joint event that's going on at that time.
Sounds excellent.
Good on you, mate. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Thank you very much.